partner up with either the county using the Housing Trust Fund funds, or the county sometimes can, if they have had a donation of land, that land will be donated to the partner, and the partner then goes and secures funding for building the affordable units. And we've had a discussion with one of the developers who actually does a lot of that kind of work down in Sonoma County. So Yolo County is my best example to answer Supervisor Colfax.
Just, if I may, please, just pursue that for just a second, though. I'm not asking whether there's been a number of units created, affordable units created, but the larger issue in all this is whether or not it's affected the price of housing, the variables that would be affected. In other words, this is a little more complex. If you're required to, if you have an ordinance in place and you want to build housing, I guess you're going to have to do it. But so the fact that in Yolo County it may have produced housing because there's enough building and there's enough desire to build, there are affordable units. But what's the impact been on the, and I think this is perhaps at the heart of some of the concern on the part of the people who have expressed concern, that it has a larger effect on the larger scene. Is there any data that's available showing that those units, those 160 places that have ordinances of various kinds, has there been any parceling out and trying to find out where there's been an increase or relative to other indices?
Because of the nature of the housing market in California, as you saw in our chart, the one chart that I brought up, housing prices have been skyrocketing as it is, and so I don't know that anyone has actually broken out that. We do have some charts that show 5 years worth of building permit data prior to the adoption of an ordinance and 5 years after, and that is on that website for the affordable housing database. And what happens, and this could be shown to you at a different time also if you'd like, what happens is that there is a real spike in building permit before the ordinance is adopted, and then there's a real drop for a year or so. And what people have interpreted that to mean is that it's not happening in a vacuum. People know that an ordinance is in the works. It takes a number of years to get it off the ground. People run out to get their building permits before the ordinance is adopted. And then after the ordinance is adopted for a year or two, there's not much activity because the building permits were all applied for prior to the adoption. Then 2 to 3 years further after the adoption of the ordinance, the rise in number of units produced and housing building permit activity tends to go back up. And we've looked at several ordinances under those conditions that track before and after. So that's about the best I can do to answer that.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Supervisor Pinches.
First of all, Supervisor Smith, you say that people would take advantage of this. That's kind of what an incentive is. I mean, you would be successful if people took advantage of that. No building fees. That's the whole idea. That's what we're talking about here, is affordable housing. When you're talking about building second units of 1,000 square foot or less, we're not going to get developers involved. These are people that probably own a home on a piece of property and feel they have room to accommodate a second unit. My example that I'd like to use is back in the 1930s, my grandfather built a home in Willits, and in the backyard, when he built the house, he built a little about 900 foot second unit, 1 bedroom, bathroom, little with a kitchen apartment. And since it was built brand new, that apartment has been rented out consistently for about almost 80 years now to people on very limited income, widows and whatnot. I remember going there as a kid, and my grandmother used to look, but I don't know how many different people for going on 80 years now, and it's still there. It's been a home for people on set and low income. So it does meet what we're talking about here, is affordable income. the real incentive is not the building fee waiver. We're not talking about waiving the cost, the cost of the design or anything like that. We're not waiving that, just the building fee in itself, which probably 70% of the building in this county goes unpermitted anyway, so we're not getting the fees anyway. But the big plus and the big incentive is if it will meet the wastewater requirements of water quality and all the agencies involved, is not having to design and do soils tests and actually putting in anywhere in outside of this sewer systems in Mendocino County, not having to put in probably a $20,000 to $40,000 sewer system. So yeah, that is a real incentive, and also it's going to reflect in the availability, because you're not buying and making payments on a separate piece of property. It's just utilizing the backyards basically of existing parcels. So that's going to go a long ways. When you take those elements all together, you're going to be able to put up, say, a 900-foot apartment or something, or put in a space for a mobile home, a single wide mobile home, and it's going to lead to some real affordable housing. And that's too much in government. We're 95% about process and 5% about product. And we should be about 95% about product and 5% of process. And this issue of putting new laws and, an ordinance, I'm sorry, I view ordinance as a law. There's nothing voluntary about it. It's the law. You may have options, but it's still a law. And I think this is an issue where we can really move forward and do something to solve the affordable housing issue. Where, frankly, if we put this ordinance in place, how many developers right now we have in Mendocino County? They're not exactly banging down our doors wanting to do huge developments. And in order for make this to work, you're going to have to do some pretty good size developments. And I just have a real problem with comparing this county, when it comes to housing of any sort, with Sonoma County, because we're not even close. We never will be, we never have been, and we shouldn't plan to be. Thank you.
Supervisor Delbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the 1,000 square foot thing, and there's always going to be somebody that will tell us that they're going to use it for grandma that may not. I mean, but we have to believe in the faith of people at some point in time and just understand that there's going to be those exceptions. But the Supervisor Pinch has mentioned the whole septic issue and creating a new policy to override staff's policy. Well, half of that $40,000 expense is driven by another staff policy that says this is what you've got to do. That doesn't necessarily always make sense either. So again, getting back to those staff policies. Some of the comments that we received, and this is getting to the meat of what you're asking for today, is where do we go? On the second units, we don't allow them in the coastal zone. And this is an issue of supply and demand. The more that there are, the lower that price is going to be. And if there's just one built in the entire coastal zone, then the price is going to, that rent is going to be a little bit higher, whether or not there's more built. So allowing the second units in the coastal zone is something we need to look at. And I know that brings up a whole myriad issues with the Coastal Commission, but that's a whole another battle. But we've got to look at the second units over there, because that's where there's a need for them, just as there's need from over here. The Prop 1C infrastructure needs in a partnership with the developers is something I think is very important, if that's a possibility. The adoption by right to reduce discretionary processes for R3 zoning is, again,